Well, hello and welcome to the TSG Live Crew Lounge. This is a panel discussion, and today we're going to be talking about trains as a lifelong hobby. And since we're in the holiday season now, the context of the conversation, at least for the beginning of the conversation, will be, in the sense of, when you had a chance to have a Christmas present and it ended up being a train, and then you ended up going from there and expanding, and it became something bigger than that. Things are a little bit different today because I don't have our top secret associate producer helping out. So I'll be a little bit stretched as I'm trying to monitor the conversation in our live chat, as well as listening to our panelists. I want to take a second to thank all the panelists for taking your time out. I know everybody's busy, and I really appreciate you guys taking your time to show up today and share your experiences with the audience here. So thank you for that. What we'll do then is, if you have a question, go ahead and type it up in the live chat that should be on the right side of your screen. If you're watching this on a replay, that's not an option for you, but you are also welcome, if you're watching on a replay, to add a comment in the comment section below. And I guess we might as well just jump right in here. And what I'd like to do first is maybe just go around our virtual table here, and you guys on the panel can introduce yourselves briefly, who you are, where you're from, and just briefly what your interest is in the topic, and we'll go from there. So, Rob, you're the first person on my list. Why don't you go first? And thank you for coming.
You're welcome, John. I'm Rob Spangler. I'm from the Salt Lake City, Utah area. I've been a model railroader for about 46 years, since I got a Christmas train set when I was 6 years old from my great aunt. And I come from a multi-generational family of railroaders, and I was exposed to it from when I was very, very young, and developed an interest in it. And they saw, well, maybe train set's something that this kid will enjoy for Christmas. And that started a lifelong hobby. And, half a century later, I'm still at it.
Excellent. And James Brassill, thanks for coming. Why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm James Brassill, and I'm from California, and I've been interested in model railroading for 25 years now or so. I got the stereotypical train set at Christmas one year when I was a kid. I don't even remember how old I was. Just a big plywood sheet with the train on it, and then I proceeded to destroy the initial train, or the first train that I got as a kid. Don't give a kid a steamer if they're not responsible with stuff like that. And then I took a number of years out of the hobby, and just due to not having space and being in the military, and finally once I got back home and got my own house, I got back into it about 3 years ago.
Very cool. Thank you for that. And Sparky, I call Sparky Dave. So people watching, if you hear me say Dave, that's who I'm talking to.
And if I don't answer, that's why.
Right. So you want to give the audience an idea of who you are and what your interest in this topic is.
Sparky 107, or better known as Dave. And I'm from Canada, Ontario, close to the Toronto area, but not quite. And interest in the hobby is basically fascination with trains and making something from my childhood realistic today in my memories to wood, I guess. And as far as when it all started, it started when I was 7 years old. My dad got me my first train set, but I guess we'll talk more on that kind of stuff a little later on. So,
okay, sounds good. Thank you for that. James Regier, would you like to chime in?
Well, I'm James Regier. I'm in St. Louis, Missouri, and I guess my first train set, my dad heard that my mom was going to have me, and so he rushed out and bought a Lionel train set. And so it's sort of been in my life forever. My first actual locomotive, HO scale.
Oh, okay. Because I knew that. Right, I knew that Lionel had made HO at some point. So.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. And Michelle, I think people know you from the museum, but there's more to it than that. Why don't you introduce yourself and what you do, what your interest in this topic is.
Okay, I'm Michelle Kempema, and I live in Greeley, Colorado. I had a sad childhood with no train sets in it. I didn't discover it till like college. But the first train set I ever bought was a Thomas the Tank Engine to go underneath the Christmas tree in G scale. So, and we all know where I work, so I love the hobby.
Right. I guess I kind of left myself out since I'm sitting at the table. I'll mention that I got my first train when it was my second birthday. So it was 1970, and it was on top of my birthday cake. And it was just a little round cake like this. And it was like a wind up train. And the very same Christmas that same year, like a month later, I got some big die cast metal thing. I mean, it was, it took batteries and lit up and made noise and stuff like that. So that was mine. And I was out of trains for a really long time because I got into other stuff, music and that kind of thing. And I came back into trains. Really, I mean, they were kind of always there though, and I think that's something that I've heard other people talk about where they got away from it, but they come back to the things that they enjoyed as a child, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, I guess then we can get into a little bit more detail. I could call on somebody if you prefer, or if anybody wants to, just unmute yourself and start talking and let us know what more detail is of how you're involved with this train thing. Okay, it looks like I'm going to have to call on somebody because everyone's being quiet. Michelle, I can hear you laughing. I can see you laughing, but I can't hear it. But I'm hearing it in my head. How about one of the Jameses? Somebody unmute and start talking. Let's get this conversation going. If I see any comments pop up in the chat down here, I'll do my best to highlight them so we can answer them as they come. And just real quickly, anybody watching wants to ask a question specifically to one of the panelists, put that in your question, and that way they'll know who it's to. Go ahead, James.
All right. So yeah, basically, as I said, I got the quintessential Christmas train set. I don't know how old I was. It had to be sometime around kindergarten, so 5 or 6 or something like that. At this point, I have no idea. Came downstairs one morning or on Christmas morning, and it was sitting on top of the kitchen table, just taking up the whole thing. It had already been assembled, all the track laid down, and kind of a odd-shaped oval type thing with the bridge and painted green. And for that, it never really got much further than that. For I don't know, what was it? Probably 6 or 7 years. I'd go to the hobby shop, pick up other little cheap train sets with what I could with my allowance. And DCC, I think, was just starting to come onto the scene at the time, and I remember reading the magazines that I'd get from the hobby store because I didn't have enough money to get a subscription to any of the magazines at the time. So I remember reading about DCC and being just absolutely excited about how you could run more than one train at one time. Or if you were running 2 trains on DC, they'd run into each other eventually because they were never speed matched, or you'd burn out your throttle because it was cheap and it came with your first train set. So yeah, DCC was just coming out at the time, and I remember being just super excited about it. And then I got into my teenage years. We moved houses. It sat in the barn for a long time, and I never did anything with it. And then I got out of high school, went into the Navy for 4 years, and basically was just moving around a lot, so I never had any time for it. Would occasionally pop over to a hobby shop and kind of see what was going on, and never really got much further than that until about 3 or 4 years ago when I started watching John's videos, and then I found Silicon Valley Lines, joined them, and have been pretty heavily involved in the hobby where I can be since then.
I guess we should probably mention that. That's where I know you from, is from Silicon Valley Lines. And I got to say, the kind of stuff that you do with trains now, James, is pretty cool. I mean, because you built one of the first camera cars for the virtual ops, didn't you?
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about that, and we'll go to the next person after that?
Yeah. So basically, yeah, it's kind of led me to be working on some of the technical side of things, not necessarily with like what the trains themselves do. My background is in tech, so we set up the what do they call it? The cab camera project for Silicon Valley lines, where we can do remote operations. After we shut down back in March, we kind of did the thing where we bounced around for a while with doing op sessions on somebody's layout at home, where we kind of tell them where to move everything. And then I think around July, it kind of became apparent that things weren't going back to normal for a while. And we're all paying dues to a club that we can't really use. So we had to figure out some way to expand things and be able to operate with only 2 or 3 people in the layout room at a time, where we can socially distance properly and all that stuff. So we basically set up this system where we can remotely control the trains, and they just have a camera with a Raspberry Pi sitting on the front of them, and I don't actually have one with me at the moment. They just sit in front of the lead engine, and we use those to act like we're operating. We're actually moving cars around the layout because we have a system set up by Josh, our operations manager, who he can tell the system, hey, make this a point-to-point run, and we move the cars point-to-point for the remote operators so that there's no switching involved, but we still get to feel like we're actually operating properly.
Right.
And, yeah, it's worked out really well so far.
Yeah, something really cool. And I don't know if it's still posted or not, James. Maybe you could comment on that later. But the Silicon Valley Lines had a virtual open house a couple weeks ago where people could visit virtually, right? And actually run a train. I actually ended up doing it, and I had a lot of fun. I mean, it was kind of simple. It was just a throttle where you can go or stop or reverse and turn the light on and off. But it was fun because you can tell that well, let me back up for a second. One of the thrills, at least for me, with trains is turning the throttle or manipulating the throttle and seeing it happen, down on the track. I think we probably can all relate to that, right? And it was that same thing, only virtually, because I was doing the throttle on the computer and I was watching a screen that had the camera, which was the forward-facing view of what you would see if you were driving the locomotive from inside the locomotive. It was really cool. So thanks for doing that too, James. I know that everybody involved had a part to play, but I knew that you were instrumental in getting one of the first ones going. So it's very cool.
Yeah, that worked out really well. We have a couple of things that we need to fix for next time, but we're looking to potentially do another one of the virtual open houses. Well, I don't have a date yet, but we're thinking sometime late winter, early spring.
Oh, cool.
We just have to wait to see when the county will allow us to have gatherings of more than one person at a time.
Right.
Because we're technically classified as a museum through the county. So we have to follow all the standard regulations that they have or face getting in trouble. So
right. Yeah, you don't want to be shut down as a club. So no, I want to bring in Rob because I've had a chance to see your layout, Rob, which is one of the best layouts I think I've ever seen. Yeah.
Hey, thanks, John.
Right. You're welcome. And it's deserved. I mean, I wish that we could do a whole show of just like a layout tour, which maybe someday, right? When we can travel again. But I'm kind of curious to hear more about your path because, you said you started off basically as a kid and 52 years later, you have this amazing layout. I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, as a kid, I had the exposure to, trains outside the front door. I mean, my mom grew up in a house that was literally across a 1-lane dirt road from the double track UP main line in Echo, Utah. So I got to watch trains whenever I went to visit grandma. And my mom was an artist, and I always liked doing art with her and learning to paint and so on. And I saw the hobby as a way to combine art and my love of railroading. And I also, from my dad, who always liked to build things and, do home remodeling and, do built-in shelves and stuff in the house, a real love of building things. So the hobby of model railroading got me to combine all of the things that I enjoyed from being a kid with the activities that my parents did when they were adults. And that's been really rewarding to me, because you never stop learning, you never stop wanting to get better at what your craft is. And, you know, having parents that came from these different directions in terms of, I do not have a YouTube channel that has more than 2 videos. You're welcome to go visit my 2 videos on WB8 sub. Yeah, they kind of suck. Anyway, it's true.
Oh, that was an instant answer. I like that.
So, yeah, that's where it gives me the lifelong desire to keep going, is that I like learning and trying to get better at a craft. And I don't think there's any better hobby than model railroading to try to push yourself in all kinds of crafts at once.
Yeah, and I also have to say, I was going to mention it when I was talking about your layout, that your backdrop paintings are also among the best I think I've ever seen. So your work in art is really paid off when it comes to the model railroading.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I've noticed I've incorporated into the social aspect of the hobby as well, because I like to help other modelers with painting. In your narrow gauge discussion last month, you know, you had Doug Jolly on, and I painted the backdrops down at Doug's. And there are several other modelers in various places, including out of state, where I've painted backdrops. So that's gotten me to work with, you know, friendships with people from all over the place, you know, doing the artwork.
Right. And it's true. I think that you're touching on something that probably was going to happen in this conversation anyway, which is, at least to me, when I think about giving a kid a Christmas present, model railroading, as you correctly stated, is something that incorporates a lot of different things. And I want to go to Michelle, because this is something that I know we've had conversations about and are involved with something to sort of enhance that experience for kids, which is, you have science, you have electronics, design, woodworking. I mean, there art, research. There's so many things to the hobby. I would like to talk or hear from you, Michelle, about that as in the context of what you do with the museum. I think that would be kind of a cool thing to hear, to share with people.
Okay. We call it STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, math. And you can apply pretty much anything that you're teaching in a classroom, you can actually apply on a model railroad layout in some way, or in some thing about the miniature world that you're in. It might not be directly at the train. It might be something else, like weather. We had a whole piece about weather, and we used our paintings on our backdrop to talk about the storm cloud that's coming, and how the railroad had to build a snow shed because sometimes there's snow. And so, you know, there's just a lot of, it's interesting how you can always tie something back. We even did paleontology, because, you know, there's plaster used to take bones out of the ground and plaster used on a layout. So I know it's kind of a stretch, but it's still something that goes together. If you want to learn the same skill, you know, you use the same product. So there's just a lot of different things and ways that you can take any sort of task or skill and use it in modeling. And so we do that a lot at the museum. And I think that's what really draws some of the kids in. I know sometimes when we did the classroom with all the kids, we did an entire kindergarten through 8th grade school and built layouts with them. And a lot of the girls connected with like the water. They loved how the water flowed down a hill, and they loved creating natural landscapes. And, you know, the boys were like, train, 100% train. But it's, I don't know, there's a whole lot that goes into it.
Well, I think that you're bringing up something that is tangential, if not nothing else, which is, there's more to model railroading than the trains. You're building dioramas, and you don't have to have trains on a diorama unless you're doing a model railroad. You know what I mean? Like there's more. It doesn't have to be limited to only one thing.
Right.
And, you know, like there's a very famous YouTuber, Luke Towan, I think that's how you say his name, from Australia. And all he does is build these dioramas. And he has a tremendous number of subscribers and gets a lot of views. I don't know if you guys are all familiar with his work, but it's what he does is pretty amazing, and it's pretty cool to see the process that he goes through. One of the things that I enjoyed about the national convention last year was the clinic that you did, Rob, on the painting of the backdrops, because you were showing stuff. But I liked your presentation because you were telling people to try it. And the only way you're going to get good at something is if you try it. And next thing you know, you're able to do what you set out to do. And I think that's also a key sort of aspect to introducing kids to model railroading, because it can give them the self-efficacy or the confidence, right, to know that they can do something that they set out to do.
Right. You're never going to learn if you don't try this stuff. And if you get started as a kid, you can learn to, mess around with things. Kids are used to failure a lot more than adults. I think adults we're so scared of screwing something up, that we don't want to try and risk that. But when you're a kid, you mess things up all the time. So that's why it's great to introduce the hobby to children, because they're used to messing around with something, getting kind of a disaster of a result, but finding some kernel that they can learn from and then move from there.
Right.
Yeah, we got a question in the chat there from Fred Wild too. It's Michelle. How long has the museum been doing the kids stuff, and how many do you have now staying with
good
it?
question. I think it's been about 5 years ago that we decided to really start working with kids in-house. And then we realized we have no space. So we had to go out to them. So we went to a local school, a K-8 school that's down the street from us. And that's where we did the large dioramas, the Woodland Scenics, big kits with the kids. And then at the end of the school year, we put them all together and ran a huge layout that all the kids had built. And they loved it so much, we started doing after school programming with that school from then on up until COVID. So, but we asked them what they wanted to do next, and they wanted to do Lego robotics. And then they wanted to do Lego dioramas. And then, so I got a grant to buy a ton of Legos. And so we did Mission Moon. And I know it sounds like crazy, but the kids realized that, there's no gravity on the moon. So you're going to need like a monorail to move around. You're going to need a train on the moon. And so it was just really interesting to see the kids come to their own conclusions about things. So as far as how many are in our program, we also started a T-track program. I saw someone else asked a question about, or had a comment about T-tracks. We found that with the real estate that you're allowed to have in a home with your mom and your house and all of that, the T-tracks are perfect for kids because they can take them home and they fit in their closet or in their bedroom on a shelf. And then they can bring them to the museum and connect them all together and run a layout on the weekends. And so we found that kids really liked it. I think we had about 12 kids the first summer that we did that. And then we've had a lot of kids just come and do different things with us. As far as actually operating on our big museum layout, you have to be 16. So we try to keep them involved in all of the smaller layouts, and we're actually building an N-scale one right now. And we had a plan to do that this whole summer, but with COVID, it'll have to be later. So what we did is we shifted to, when COVID started, we shifted to a virtual classroom, and we started doing STEAM-based things. We've done structures and engineering using straws and pipe cleaners, and we built houses out of that. And we've done just all sorts of geology, paleontology. We did nature. But yet we can always tie it back to railroading. And we did an art one, and we used a painting of a Union Pacific F unit. And we talked about depth and color and shading. And we had all the kids got a basic watercolor set, like the $1 watercolor set that you can get, and we did amazing paintings with it with kids using a railroad watercolor painting for 4 lessons. So we had 785 kids signed up for that class.
Yeah, that's a lot of people considering how sort of remote really is, right?
Right. And so what we did is I got a grant actually from Union Pacific's foundation to purchase all the supplies for the summer classes and the art kits and a bunch of the other topics. And we went to all of our boys and girls clubs in our entire county, and they home delivered to all these kids. So we couldn't do it on our own. We had to partner with our community. And then we have about 220 families that have kids involved in stuff through the museum directly, and the rest is through boys and girls clubs. So, it's neat to work with our community and have them all be excited about railroading. So
there's a question. Yeah. Sorry, there's a question, Michelle, about whether people can donate to the kids program directly, or is that something that just gets done out of the general fund?
Oh, you absolutely can designate your donation. In fact, we have a youth fund where people donate just to our youth programs. You just have to tell us. Just say, hey, this money's for youth. And then we designate it, and those dollars are only spent on youth. So.
Well, maybe we can publicize that. Isn't it cmrm.org as the
Correct.
museum's? Yes, cmrm.org is the Colorado Model Railroad Museum, where Michelle is the director. And I'm sure there's a donate button, right? We were talking about that earlier. Everyone has a donate button.
There is. And I think there's a note you can put on it that you could say for youth. And if not, call and tell me, and we'll designate it for you. So
there we go. So I want to get Dave and James involved on this as well. So let's go to one of you guys and see what you have to say about that, because I don't want to feel like someone's being left out. Because you work for a museum too, right, James?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I work at the Magic House St. Louis Children's Museum, and I maintain the layout there. And as a matter of fact, that has grown in some ways in this past year. In fact, just before COVID hit, the museum had a display. Well, I guess this was a while before COVID hit, but they had a display from the Union Pacific Railroad about forestry. And part of that was that they had a wooden train set, a Brio train set kind of thing. And they also had a locomotive model where you could, play with the throttles, play with the horn, all of those different things. And it had a video screen that if you'd throttle up, it would go faster on the screen, go slower, and so on. So they contracted with Pete Walliger to make that a permanent exhibit, and that's right next to the model train layout now. And so that's one of the methods of sort of getting kids involved, getting them to play with the trains. And there's no age restriction for operating the trains at the Magic House, but it's all press button operated. So you go there, you press the button, and the main line will run, and it's all automated so that it goes a certain segment. Prior to COVID, when I'd be there, one of the ways I'd try and help was, the kids are always very curious. They're wanting to spend, a couple hours even there watching the model trains run around the layout until their parents practically have to drag them away. And I've been there while I'm maintaining it. I'm often using my own equipment. And so I bring the throttle out, let the children have a crack at running the train, blowing the horn, ringing the bell, that kind of thing. They really seem to enjoy it.
I had to unmute myself. I was going to ask you, somebody was asking on here about something like a railroad merit badge at the museums. It's like for the kids, right? So I guess that James, you and Michelle could talk to that. James Brassill actually could talk to that too. I mean, I know that Silicon Valley Lines has much younger members, and somebody else was asking about the age restriction. You want to ask her, Dave, yourself?
Sorry, I was playing with the chat too. So, yeah, you said this kids had to be 16 or whatever to actually run on the layout in the museum. I'm just curious of why they have to be 16, and is that like an insurance reason or?
No, we actually set that ourselves. For one thing, we'd like them to drive themselves there. Otherwise, the parent has to stay there all day. and it's just a little bit harder. Our layout is a 5,500 square foot, fully operational, dispatched, and you have to be able to run a train and talk to the public kind of thing. So we want our kids to be pretty experienced at modeling before we throw them out into that environment. And so we do have an exception. We have a statement that says, or on a case by case basis, because we currently have Chris Cochran, who was just chosen by Walthers as one of the youth modelers of the year, who's been modeling with us since he was 10. And now that he just turned 14, he started at 13. He actually runs on our layout all the time because we know he can do it, he can handle it, and he does a great job. So it's really kid by kid on that. But for someone to just walk in and say, hey, I'm 12, I want to run on your layout, I've never run a train before, it's too detailed to just throw a kid into that without having a run on some of our other smaller layouts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense too. And I think a lot of other clubs are like that too. You can't just join and all of a sudden start running trains and stuff. They want to give you the orientation and kind of ease you into actually being part of the club. So
We have 138 signals you got to learn. I have a hard time running. So
I'm kind of curious, Rob. I know that you do operating sessions with grown kids. A lot of our friends.
Right.
Do you ever have younger kids involved with your layout? I mean, as a privately owned layout, do you?
Yeah, we do. If I've got a friend who has a kid that he can vouch for, that is, careful and so on, I welcome those people to come here. Getting kids involved in the hobby through, hosting them at op sessions is something that I've done quite a few times. And yeah, that's a welcome thing. Anytime anyone can bring a kid over that we can introduce the hobby to and serious model railroad operations to. Yeah,
I think that there's a lot of value in that kind of mentorship too.
And as a matter of fact, the one thing I'll say is here in St. Louis, I guess it's technically not in St. Louis, it's on the Illinois side of the river. In Maryville, Illinois, there's K-10s model trains. And that's a 60-foot by 70-foot layout space. Pretty huge. The first Sunday of every month, every Sunday in December, they haven't been open because of COVID, but they would normally have the layout open for kids to run with the supervision of their parents. And that's kids of all ages, from 3 to 4 on up, as long as they can hold the throttle and either on their parents' shoulders or be able to see over the edge of the layout themselves. But that's definitely been a lot of fun, sort of introducing folks into the hobby that way. Just having that community layout, that community space where people that have been, doing model railroading for a long time can meet up with some that may be doing it for the first time. And then as a sort of education program for the hobby, the people that have been doing the Sunday running for a while can then graduate up and join the operating session, which happens once a month. But again, it's all been suspended because of COVID. Hopefully, once this goes back by the wayside, things will start up there again. But that's been a wonderful experience.
I just want to say that we at the Colorado Model Railroad Museum, it's a visitor experience focused entity. And I think that is another reason why we do have that higher age requirement. But we realize that's a weakness in sustaining the hobby. And so it's something that we need to constantly keep in mind. And how are we going to get kids involved at a young age? So it's that challenge for me to make sure that I do it better. So that's, yeah. So, it's that balance that we have to find as a visitor experience type of place, but yet how do you sustain the hobby? So that's why we're trying to do all the things we're doing. So.
Well, Michelle, do you have a certain spot maybe that you could make at the club or at the museum type thing for beginners? Like it says 13 and up on all our boxes and stuff like that. So maybe bringing them in at 13 and you have like a smaller layout set off to the side for them or something that they could start learning signals and operations and things like that.
Yeah, we actually cleaned out an entire wall section, 14 feet long, to put a T-track layout in for just this purpose that we were going to start this past summer. So we'll have it for next year. So yeah, that's our plan, is to, in that way, if somebody visits and they have a T-track, they could pop it in that layout and run it today while you visit us. That's kind of what our ultimate goal is. Bring it with you and let's run it. So that's what we're building.
Someone's asking the question, and I guess we can kind of go around the table on this one, is whether you see yourself modeling after retirement and what changes might that bring. I think, at least for me, I know that as I get older, I need stronger and stronger glasses. And I kind of started off in N scale, and I'm going more to the larger scales now. And I sometimes get, actually, as a matter of fact, these models behind me on the shelf are O scale models that I've done product spotlights on. And I'm telling you right now that larger size is really appealing to my eyes right now. What do you think, Rob?
I'll try to stay in HO as long as I can because I have so much, invested in it. But I've considered moving up to a larger scale, at least to have an alternate project. I like narrow gauge, so I'd consider something like SN3, or maybe get really weird, do ON30, or I know a guy here locally who's doing 3/8 N2, these funky little narrow gauge industrial stuff, but in really large scale. So I don't see myself ever leaving the hobby, but if my eyesight becomes such a problem that I can't work with the HO stuff anymore, I'll definitely stay in and do something bigger.
The point is to stay in, though, right? I mean,
oh yeah,
because your interest isn't gonna wane. It's just your eyesight wanes.
Right.
Yeah.
What about you, James? Either James, I guess Brassill, since you haven't said anything lately, do you feel like you're going to change or lose interest, or what do you think about that?
So I don't think I'll lose interest. I might try and go up a scale if my eyesight gets worse. I tried to go to N scale when I got back into things. I picked up a couple of cheap used things, tried to change out some couplers, and then just threw them in a box. Or actually, I put them on my shelf in my office at work, just as a display thing, and went back to the HO stuff and was like, yeah, I'm not going to mess around with that unless it's something pre-built, and I'm going to go run it on somebody else's layout. I'm happy where I am in HO because it's where it started. I have been looking at S scale stuff, but it's almost impossible to find anything for that. And if I go O scale as I get older, I'd probably have to build a garage or something to do it in because I don't have enough room in my basement.
Space constraints are real, aren't they?
Yeah, so I like the more prototypical scales. I know that O scale is starting to get more of that now, and it's starting to kind of take off. What, P48 or something like that? I can't remember exactly what the name for the prototypical O scale is.
Oh, Proto 48?
Yeah, Proto 48.
Yeah.
That would probably be where I'd go if I had to go up, but I'm going to try and stick where I am now and get more powerful glasses or more powerful magnifying glass or something like that. And I don't have any plans to get out when I retire. In fact, when I retire, I'll have more time to do that, but that's also, at this point, 30 years from now. So who knows where the hobby will be at that point even. Hopefully greatly expanded, and maybe there will be better SCL stuff at that time.
What about you, Dave? I mean, you've spent a lot of time and a lot of effort building your HO layout that's behind you there. Where do you see that going, or do you feel like you'll have to change as you get older?
Well, first of all, I got to say I'm only 20 years old, so I'm not even really thinking about retirement.
Yeah, the water must be pretty bad in Canada if you're 20.
Yeah. No, it's the same as everybody looks at. You start in a certain scale or something, you might change later on due to eyesight or dexterity, as it's been brought up in the chat type thing. But once you get so much of a certain scale, or like myself, build a shed or a certain area for your layout, you're not going to change. And getting involved as much as all of us are here on the panel, it's not something you're actually going to think about giving up in the future anyway. So when you do retire, I believe you're setting yourself up to give yourself a pastime, a hobby, and something to do when you actually do retire. So
it looked like you were going to say something, James.
Well, I didn't have that much to say, but yeah, I'd have no plans on giving up the hobby if and when I retire. It's a lot of fun now. It'll be a lot of fun then. I can definitely see eyesight and dexterity as being discouraging factors, but I mean, hey, the interest is going to be there, so I'll find some way to keep involved.
Well, there's something else to think about too, which is because there are so many different aspects of the interest or of the hobby, you could also switch to just doing research. I mean, you could write a book. I mean, you could just paint backdrops, right? I mean, you don't have to be limited to simply working on models or building a layout, right? It doesn't have to be one-dimensional like that.
All right, and switching from like those tiny 0402 LEDs, to layout construction would be a step that would be a little bit less demanding on the eyesight too, I think. Yeah.
I know, Michelle, that you're involved with. You have an N scale layout personally. Do you find that as you get older, that
I know exactly what I'm going to do when I get older. I'm going to ride trains. I'm going to ride every train I can ride. And then I'm going to buy the model of it and collect it. So probably my layout's going to be HON3 Colorado narrow gauge. And I'll probably own every K36 on the Coomber's and Toltec. And yeah, that's probably how that's going to turn out.
So you have solid plans, right? I mean,
yeah.
Yeah.
I really like the narrow gauge.
Yeah, me too. I'm finding that I love it. And so I fully expect that's what I'll do.
Something I've found, and we had our narrow gauge discussion last month on this program. And what I found is that most of the narrow gaugers that I've run across are very hardcore into the modeling, whether it's, scratch building or putting stuff together where they have to fabricate it themselves. And I know that a lot of people find a lot of reward in that too. So that was part of the reason why I wanted to do the show. I know we're talking about a different topic this time, but I wanted to mention that because that is a natural progression, I think, especially for someone who started off just with HO. Right, Rob? Like for you might find that ON3 or something like that, dealing with larger stuff, but also you've honed your craft so where you can actually build stuff. And I mean, I see the pictures of the stuff you're building now for your HO on Facebook that you share, and you'd fit right into a system like that,
Right. And to get to the question that was asked about the future of product development, I think we're seeing right now, especially since you mentioned Facebook, there are so many groups out there for people that are sharing how they're doing 3D printing and laser cutting at home and doing things that a few years ago were just unthinkable. People sharing files of, here, I built this structure in O scale, feed this into your laser and make one in N, that type of thing is going on, where I think a lot of the future of things that are not going to require intensive tooling like locomotives and so on are probably going to be things that we can download and make ourselves. I've got an example of something sitting right here. I'll grab for you.
This is the benefit of having someone doing this from their layout room.
Right. So this is a car I'm working on right now. It's a kit from Canon and Company. And what this basically is, it's a bunch of parts from branch line and Intermountain and Athearn and so on, but the sides are laser cut styrene that you build, laminate, and then scratch build parts yourself for door tracks and so on. And I can see that if we have, the cost goes down on things like laser cutters, feed somebody a plan to say, hey, cut out the sides for this SP B7026 boxcar and create that thing at home. So I think a lot of that for our future is going to be you creating more for yourself rather than relying on major manufacturers doing it all for you.
Right.
Yeah. Or relying on a collective, right? Because Shapeways, for example, has a store, don't they, where you can go and order stuff that other people, or I think it's Shapeways. I know I saw someplace that has a 3D shop where people have uploaded.
Right. There's Shapeways. There's a whole lot of things. I mean, there's Thingiverse, right? Where all you got to do is download that STL file, and then with the slicer program for whatever printer you have, you can convert that to something that you can go ahead and print out in the scale of your choice. It's really pretty remarkable how all those new technologies are coming together to change the face of model railroading.
Now, there's another question in the chat from Heath, and I just kind of, with the title of Lifelong Hobby, question from him is, do you notice a divide between certain age groups or not being as willing to share the hobby, or do you think it is overblown and everyone is welcome? And I'd have to say nowadays that once you join a club, everybody's kind of family in that aspect, but you now have YouTube also. So I think it's a lot more open. I have noticed actually that the younger people are sharing videos of their trains, the older people are starting to share, and then you've got the older people that are even getting involved with sharing videos and stuff like that too. Everybody is at the stage now where they want to share the hobby and get their information out. So I don't know if anybody else has seen a different aspect of that, but I think it's open to everybody now, and everybody's getting really friendly with it. It's not.
I think it's getting better.
Anymore.
So one thing I've noticed is in a lot of hobbies, and I'm involved in quite a few, there's always gatekeepers, more or less. The people who have been around for a long time and think that everybody should know everything about whatever hobby, except model railroading doesn't seem to have nearly as much of that. Or if they do, they're not the popular people in the hobby. They're not the ones who are out there trying to share it for people or share it with people. That's one thing that model railroading doesn't seem to have nearly as many of. You'll have a person here or there, but everybody seems to just kind of want to share their projects with everybody because it's a lot of work to do a lot of these things. And to get the kids involved, like with my club layout, we have anywhere from, I think our youngest member is under 10. He may be sharing a membership with his brother because they run together, they operate together when they're down there. But then we have all people who are retired as well, and everybody wants to share with everybody. We don't really block that from happening, which is nice. And I think as a whole, the hobby is just better for that.
I think it depends on the place, because I've heard people talk about, someone even posted a funny comment. I thought, oops, wrong one. Read this comment. And you know this person. I think we all know this person. There's always the one, guy at the club or at the museum or whatever it is, say, damn kids touching my models. The sourpuss is what I usually call them for family shows. But I mean, I guess, how do we change that? Because like what you're saying, James, and I've seen this at SVL, I think you're in a very good situation there, though, where that's just the nature of the members at that club. They are very encouraging and very positive and very open to helping and sharing and all that. But I think that we have to be cognizant of what we're doing as sort of ambassadors of the hobby. You know what I mean? To not be that guy. Like, so if you see a little kid and you're out there with your Y throttle or something, hey, do you want to blow the horn? You push this button right here. I mean, you could make that kid's day, and it could end up turning that person into a lifelong, like Rob. I mean, look, I guess, I mean, if you've seen this layout, you know what I'm talking about. It's just, you could start that process in somebody just by being nice to someone, like I'm kind of sorry. I was going to ask you, Rob, because since I brought you up, was there someone that sort of nudged you along or like encouraged you? And really, that's for everybody who wants to say something about it. I'm curious.
Well, there are a bunch of people. One of the people, Doug Jolly, that was on your show last month, I've known him for nearly 40 years. And there's a few other people that have come and gone as well. A lot of my lifelong friends are people I met in the hobby when I was before I was a teenager. But one thing I wanted to point out with this, the age and whether people are more welcoming now than they used to be, I think one of the things we have to be cognizant of it when we have groups and clubs is that we need to not tolerate bullying type behavior from somebody like that. And if we let people get away with it, it starts to become a cultural problem. And it's suddenly the whole club gets a reputation of being a bunch of snobs because just there's one guy that's been allowed to get away with it and run everybody off. So I think we all, if we're involved in groups, whether it's online or in person at a club or anywhere, we need to be thinking of how to treat people well, how to welcome somebody, whether it's a kid or a family or an older person that's getting involved in the hobby, and not run them off. And if we see behavior that runs people off, we need to not tolerate that. Make it welcoming. And I think the hobby's getting better at that over time compared to what I recall from when I was a kid. And there seemed to be a lot of curmudgeonly old guys that would, just dump on you if you were a kid. And I see less of that now. So I think that's encouraging.
Yeah, that's the guy I'm talking about. Damn kids, don't want them. Get off my lawn, right?
Can I just say I actually had a volunteer who told me that. He's like, you got a problem here. I'm like, what? And he goes, all the damn kids. Oh my God. Yeah. So we have this thing called a mission statement because we're a nonprofit. And our mission is to use model railroading to educate, inspire, and bring joy to all ages. So all I have to do is say, are you bringing joy? Because if you're not bringing us joy, the door's right.
And I think that goes to what Rob's talking about. Don't tolerate that nonsense, right?
Nope.
I retired him. We've actually let 3 volunteers go for that kind of behavior before. Just said it's not working out. Sorry, we're not having fun. So, yeah.
We're a nonprofit as well at S.T.E.A.M, so we have that same mission statement. And we also we have people who maybe they don't want to model out there being used as general population stuff. So they either take it home with them because they're afraid of it getting broken or something like that. But also the children who tend to join the club with their parents and whatnot, they tend to join and they tend to be ready to do stuff properly. I think it kind of just attracts that kind of kid as well. Maybe I haven't been there long enough and there's been something in the past, but I have not heard of anything like that either. So.
What? Maybe you're that kid though, James. Maybe you're the one that they're tolerating.
Yeah, possibly.
Well, I think it's all about attitude that you take to it as well. I think one of the things that I've been sort of observing, the hobby when I got into it versus the hobby now. You have the Athearn Blue Box. Those not necessarily the best detailed, but really reliable models. You had the Kato. You had all of these things that you could get in, and as a kid, I remember I would wreck them, and they would come back and they would bounce back fine. And it's important to be able to find models like that are reliable, but at the same time, can take that beating. That you can just let the kids play with them and relax and just kind of have fun with them, rather than take that really fancy premium model that's like hyper detailed, and that thing hits the concrete canyon once and there's going to be pieces everywhere. So I think it's important that you set yourself up in these situations that you can let people run wild and have fun with it.
And I think that's just the thing too. Like I just have a personal layout and the shed and stuff, but I have kids that come over, adults, friends, whatever. They bring their kids, and what I've tend to learn is buy the Walters mainline stuff when the little kids are coming over, and let them have fun with it. If it hits the floor, it's not going to cost me as much, or the parent. I don't know what you want to do with it, right? But $100 locomotive with DCC and sound type thing, compared to your Katos and stuff like that, which are running you $400. So if you have people like that that's going to put your layout and your trains at risk, why would you have them up in the first place? Now, I know it's a little bit different for layouts or museums, but Michelle can say that they've got walls up. You can't get close to their trains type thing. It's the same with clubs and stuff like that. They're not going to let the kids and stuff in there to get that close. And if they do, it's the parents' responsibility to look after that stuff. So
I have to say something. We actually don't have that high of a plexiglass wall. It's this tall. But I have to say the public's super respectful. And I call it the Disney World effect, because we keep it so clean and so it's just such an alive thing that people don't mess with it. Every now and then somebody will 5-finger something while we're running, but in general, the public's awesome about it. But yeah, our walls are only this tall. So,
right.
But I agree, though. And that's another reason for 16, when we go back to that question, because we're running really expensive trains, and to throw an Athearn Blue Box on there, I'd have to go put it into the whole computer system, give it I can't just put that baby on the layout and run. Yeah. So we have to have a second layout. And so we've known this, we have this issue, and we need to have something that we can let people touch and run.
I think that there's something to be said for having the right equipment for the right application. It's like having the right tool for the job. I'm not going to, if I know that there's going to be a bunch of kids at the museum for an open house or something, I'm not going to run the train that has all the exact rail cars on it. I'm going to just run the stuff that's at the club, because it tends to be sort of lower end stuff anyway. Whereas if you're going to be doing a serious operating session, then yeah, maybe you want to have your good stuff for that, where there's only going to be adults there. right? So I do think that a lot of what happens can be directed by you ahead of time. Do you know what I mean? Like an ounce of prevention, as they say, right? So I think there's definitely something to that. And there's something also to be said for, and I wanted to bring this up because one of the things that I've noticed as sort of an observer to this hobby is that all of these models say age 14 and up. And before that, you have Legos or Brio, which is kind of, I mean, well, Legos are a little different. Even adults like to play with Legos, but like Brio, you know, those little wooden trains, that's like for 5 and under. So there's this age gap between 5 and 14 or something like that, that there isn't really a lot of stuff, you know, for kids to get into this. So if you don't get them with the wooden trains or the train around the cake like I had when I was 2, when kids are very young, sometimes you have to wait until they're 12 or 13 or 14, and by then they've developed other interests, right? So it's there's kind of a challenge there, and there's not really a lot in the marketplace for that in-between age.
But
John,
you also have eBay.
I think there is kind of an in-between area for that. And like, if you want to start getting kids hooked on stuff like that, and not to promote Walters or anything else, but there is the starter series, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can get into these things, get the kids, like if they're 10 years old, you know, they like trains and stuff like that. Get them one for Christmas, throw it out there, and if it gets them hooked, then they can start getting their own stuff that's better and bigger or whatever. But you can get that stuff that is, it has just the right amount of detail to let them see what it's all about. They can get into the trees, they can get into the woodland scenics, they can get into doing the scenery, modules and stuff like that, and just run with it, right?
Well, you know, as a matter of fact, that's a question that I do get a lot at the Magic House. You know, how can we get something for our kids? And what I'll recommend, you know, is until they're about 8, you probably do want to get them Brio or you know, some kind of wooden railway thing. Lego has some nice alternatives too for that kind of thing. In fact, my girls really enjoy playing with their Duplo Thomas sets and that kind of thing. But beyond that, you know, once they get into that age where they're looking to explore, there are those train sets out there, as Dave mentions. But I'd say there's also eBay. You know, look up those reputable models. You don't have to have the newest thing on the block. You have to have something that's reliable. That's the main thing I want to stress with that, is that you want a model that's reliable, that you put it on the track, you hook up the power, and it's going to run. And it's going to run and do it nicely, because who wants to chase down the maintenance issues? That'll run the hobby for them. But I say look up an older model on eBay, find the best deals that you can, you know, cobble something together, and you can have a great deal of fun. You can get yourself a little setup and, you know, just kind of build with it as you grow. That you know, you can start with that 4x8 layout. There's no reason you can't do it. And in fact, you know, the Yathern Ready to Run offers some of the similar details some of the similar deals and pricing points these days, if adjusted for inflation. So there's a lot of options out there to get into the hobby.
Now, James, just to interrupt you for a little bit, there, Al Mar brings up a great point here in the chat. I don't know if Tia or John can find it, but modelers don't set age. Companies do. And that's just it. You can get some of the kids out there that are 10, 8 years old and just fall in love with the hobby and can get right into it, get themselves doing exactly what you're doing. Like, start working with just minute details and stuff like that, right? Like, if they really start getting involved. So it is correct in what Almar says. Companies are setting the age, not the modelers.
Right.
And they're setting the age based on liability issues, right? I mean, they're saying this is what's appropriate, generally speaking. I think we all know that there are exceptions. I mean, shoot, there are adults I wouldn't let run my nice trains, you know? So, right? Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's true. I'm kind of curious, and we can go around the table on this. Thinking say as someone watching, maybe I'm a parent or a grandparent, and I know a 5-year, let's just start with 5. A 5-year-old kid, it could be a girl or a boy. I don't think that it makes any difference. But I want to give them something. What do you think? What would you look for to give them? And keeping in mind what we were talking about before, which is it needs to be able to run reliably, right? What do you think? What would you give someone? And we can just, like I said, go around.
I think part of that decision needs to be based on how much involvement does the parent really want to have? Because if you want to just turn a kid loose, then something like the wooden trains or something really simple is probably better. If the parents want to be involved, you could go into something that is more geared towards older children, and if the parent wants to run it with supervision. So I think that decision really has to be based on a conversation about what the family situation is like, and whether you're just turning somebody loose with toys or if you're really wanting them to build it as a family activity.
I think that's a really good point.
That's exactly what I was gonna say too. I have, like, grandma comes in. I want to train for my grandkid to play with at my house. Okay, she's not going to know how to wire anything up. So the best product I can give her is the battery operated Lionels ready to run, and at Christmas, the same thing for under the tree. It's so much easier to just say, here's the Polar Express. You're going to love this. And it gives them the same train experience, especially at that age, and something that's attainable is better than saying, oh no, you can't do it because you don't, and so I'd rather them have a battery powered one than nothing at all.
Right. Keep it attainable. If there's that ready existing infrastructure, like the parent sent to model railroading already, well, then they got the layout already. But if there's no layout existing, then just getting them an electric locomotive that requires a layout is unfortunately not going to do a lot of good for the time being.
Well, something I think that you also got to do is you got to give them something they know. You can't just turn around and give a 5-year-old a CN locomotive with a couple of boxcars and a caboose and say, go have fun. If they're into Thomas the Train, you're going to have to give them Thomas the Train. If they're into something that's a little more in the UK style, and I'm not up to the other TV shows that have trains and stuff in them, right? But you bring up the Polar Express also. There is a movie out about that. So on Christmas Day, watch the Polar Express and then give them the train set and watch it go. Battery operated or electric, it doesn't matter. But it has to be something that they're going to understand and they can associate their life with. I have seen this. I know what this is. I want to play with it. Then I want to make it bigger. Or I just want to give up and I want to go play with dolls or G.I. Joe or whatever else, right? So, but they gotta know what it is before you can actually give it to them. So.
I think making it relevant is a good idea. I like that.
Also, it really depends on what the parent, as was saying, somebody was saying, what the parent is willing to do with their children. If they're willing to help them set them up, something like all of the Snaptrack setups from Bachman or Kato would be good, because you could start them out with the basic oval at 5 years old with train line or one of the lesser detailed, you could kick it across the room trains and it'd be fine. You start them out with the Snaptrack and an oval, and then when they start to get to a little bit more adventurous, you can start putting in some other switches and making the big oval with the inner oval when they hit 6 or 7 years old. Put it on a piece of plywood that they can slide up under their bed, something like that. And those kits are really good from Bachman. I mean, I don't know about the quality of the actual engines themselves, but the assembly is not too hard. You just snap them together, and then there's 2 little pins that you put in for the power, and then it's just forward and back to the power, and that's another way to go. Or you could be like my dad and get me the really expensive, not really expensive, but the really detailed engine from Bachman, a little 060, and then have me destroy it by the time I'm, by the time I've hit my next birthday 3 months later. That's the actual one that I got. I still have that in my basement, but this is a after it's completely destroyed and no way to fix it. So I bought myself the proper one 20 some odd years later as I guess a gift to myself when I got back to the hobby. I happened to find it. But that's one thing you got to think about is maybe your child is good enough with stuff to not destroy it. And you can get them something like a steamer with all the side rods. So I think that's something that you got to just kind of, as a parent, ask yourself, like, is my kid ripping the head off of Barbie dolls or something? Or are they over here, you know, putting together these complicated puzzles and have that dexterity and the patience to do it?
Right.
I want to say one more thing, if I can, about what we do with those Lionel Polar Express trains. We bought 6 of them, and we took 5 of them to nursing homes and set them up the last 2 years. And we actually left them with the staff because they could take them up and put them back out. And so it was a whole new area for us to reach and bring joy to. And we were so excited when we thought of taking battery powered trains to a nursing home because they can move it if they need to. They can set it up anywhere. And we gave them lots of batteries and brought lots of joy to people. So don't forget about that whole population. So I'm really thrilled that there's a product we can do that with.
Right.
There are a lot of comments popping up on the chat here that are bringing up brands like American Flyer and Lionel. And I think as sort of more serious scale model railroaders, we kind of lose the contact with those toy trains. And I think that the toy trains, you kind of don't really think about them that often just because that's not what you're into. But I think that's a great entry for a lot of kids because they tend to be very rugged, those toy trains, and they're actually very easy to fix too. I know a friend who is into American Flyer, and he performs miracles on these trains that haven't run in 40 years. And it only takes him 20 or 30 minutes to get the thing running again. So there's something to be said for the durability of toy trains as well.
Yeah.
And like with the Lionel trains, just because it's big and toy-like as a kid and has 3 rails doesn't mean they won't continue with it for their life. Just look at somebody like Eric's trains. He's got, a whole entire basement full of bigger layout than a lot of HO scale people.
Right.
And a lot of those models are really detailed now. And I mean, there's something to be said about giving the toy, even if they change scales later or not, they may continue on collecting even just the toy trains that actually do not really look prototypical at all. And that could be a source of enjoyment for them for the rest of their lives.
There's an interesting comment.
Here too. Oh, sorry, John.
No, please go ahead, Rob.
Is that if you're thinking about giving it to someone else, look at, are the parents creative, or one or both of the parents into the aspect of, well, take something apart and put it back together? Do they like to build Legos? Do they like to do other hobby activities that would make it seem like the kid has been exposed to that as a child and understands that that's a natural, way to have fun? If the parents really don't like to do that sort of thing, it's very possible that this is not a gift for that kid because maybe the kid doesn't relate to it. So that may be something to think of in terms of whether you're going to give them something that's a little more detailed and better and more aimed at a lifelong hobby, or more something that's, well, let's see if we can introduce them with something really simple like wooden toys and see if it sparks anything before we go further.
I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
Starting with something that's not going to break the bank. That way, if it does get damaged or broken or they're not interested, you're not out a ton of money. Because I could see how somebody could be, as an adult, could be really disappointed. I spent $500 on that great thing that I like, and the kid didn't like it, right? And now it's like, now you're mad at the kid or something, So I guess I think what you're talking about, Rob, is setting the expectations really for yourself, right? As the person giving the gift. I think that's a good point.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point.
And to your point of, sometimes I think we give gifts of things like this because we're passionate about this and we really love it, but we have to manage our expectations of what the person we're giving it to is going to think of. And that person may not develop the interest that we have. And if we're trying to give a really high-end product, trying to spark an interest that may not be there, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment. The person just may look at it and move on, and it doesn't hurt them. They don't care, but it may be us that we're feeling like we're being hurt or attacked because they don't love this. So, manage the expectations like that.
Yeah, there's someone that I'm aware of who runs sort of a train thing for kids and keeps track, how many kids did I get with this? And he gets very disappointed when it's with the conversion rate, because he didn't get 98% of the kids to continue being model railroaders after they had this experience doing this one event, and I think that he's got unrealistic expectations. So I think there's a lot to what you're saying for sure. It's kind of in the same context.
Another thing you could do is once all the layouts open up, you could look around for open houses and take your child to those and see if they get stuck on it, because when kids get stuck on something, they'll be nagging you for a while for it sometimes. So if you take them there and they're interested and they're kind of asking like when they can go back, et cetera, you can try taking them back on one of their operating sessions if they allow stuff like that, and see if they're just as hooked on it a month later. And then you could think about getting them the one of the starter sets or something like that to see if they continue to be engaged in it instead of just forgetting about it the minute you leave the layout room.
I think there's also something to how is it going to fit in their home? And I don't know if anybody was in Salt Lake City for the National Train Show last year, but Walters had that amazing display where they showed how you slide a layout under your bed, how you fit it in a dresser drawer, and how you stash it in your closet. And that was part of their booth. And it really, I think, was helpful for families to understand how to fit that in your home, because that's a whole nother piece of it is, okay, so you're going to buy this set. Well, where are you going to put it?
There's something else that I just thought of as a kid. I had some trains that my parents brought home from Italy. And then I got my first Tyco train set. And I set it up outside sometimes in the dirt. They let me do it. I mean, they were not hovering over me to watch what I was doing. And I think of myself as a parent, and if I had bought one of my kids a train set that I cared about, and then they were setting it up in the dirt, I don't know if I would have a positive reaction to that. So I think you have to think about how the kid wants to play with it and what you're willing to. I mean, if it's there, do you know what I mean? Like if it's theirs, maybe you should have it in your head when you give it that it's theirs and they can do with whatever they want. Do you know what I mean? Like it kind of goes back to that setting the expectation for yourself as the gift giver. I don't know. It's just something that popped into my head as I was listening to people talking, and I remembered but I had a really great time setting these things up in the dirt. After a while, they didn't work anymore, but
Yeah, my dad kind of told me tough cookies when I broke my first locomotive.
Right.
It's like, I told you that was going to happen. And, I was, taking it as a kid, not so happy with the world in general because I just broke something like that. But, yeah, you also got to think of, like, you give it to the kid, warn them that they're possibly going to break it doing that, and then just let them have their fun. And, if you have a kid that takes disappointment not so well, maybe you need to get it across that to them that they're potentially going to break it and how they're possibly going to feel afterwards. But this is all the aspect of parenting, and I'm not a parent myself, so I'm just going on past memories, which were 25 years ago at this point.
I think you're the youngest one on the panel here, James, and you have a bigger beard than any of us. So we've been going for about an hour and 15 minutes now, and we usually cut these off around an hour and a half. So I'm thinking that it might be worthwhile to talk a little bit about I don't know, sort of wrap things up. And I'd like to put a last call out for questions that are coming from the viewers in our chat, the live chat on the side of the screen there. If anybody has a question for someone on the panel that's related to the topic, I've been seeing a lot of really irrelevant questions scrolling by. But I mean, I'm thinking also, I mentioned earlier about the age gap, and I got something from Atlas last year for a product spotlight. They came out with this thing about a year ago. I don't know if you guys will remember, but this was on a product spotlight last year. And this is something that is battery operated, but it's actually HO scale, and it will run on an HO layout. So theoretically, I could bring this to your house, Rob, and it will run on your track. You just don't turn on the track because this is battery operated. But one of the things that I thought was kind of cool about this thing is it has a little remote control. And the remote control lets you control the train, but it lets you honk the horn and turn the lights on and off and all that kind of stuff, which, at least if you're talking about getting a kid hooked into what model railroading is, contemporary model railroading, that's DCC. It
is. One of the great things about that set that you're showing there, John, is if you're somebody who wants to give that to a kid and you have a layout, invite them to come over and see how that thing looks when it runs around an actual railroad in your house, and say, okay, hey, if you keep going on this track, you at some point can have a layout like this yourself. This could be part of your future. And maybe they won't be able to picture that if it's just going around in a circle on the dining room table or something. I really encourage, when I have younger people that want to come over here, if they have a locomotive that's DCC or something like that, bring it along with them and run it here, so that they can get some exposure to seeing, their stuff in a different environment than maybe they're able to deal with something that slides under the bed or has to hang out in the corner of an unfinished basement or something. Make that part of the sharing and the getting kids involved.
I like what you said there, Rob, because you're also giving them a goal, and that goal to have a layout like what you have, that's not going to happen next year. That's something that you would work toward your entire life until you have it.
Right.
So that's developing the lifelong hobby, like what we've been talking about. I kind of like that. That's insightful, I think.
Yeah, and I think that ties with other adult activities that are like that too, like gardening or woodworking, where the adult that introduces the young person to that tends to invite them to participate. Like, hey, let's come over and build a birdhouse at my wood shop. Or let's come over and plant some flowers in this garden, and then we can watch them grow. If we treat model railroading that same kind of mentality, I think we can bring a lot of people in and give them a vision of where their future's headed.
Yeah, I like that. That's pretty profound. I had never really thought about that before, sort of planting the seed, right?
Yeah, think about the way that you want people think about the way that you could have been helped along early on. And tell the kids, do that thing that you could have used to further yourself quickly. And just think about when you were a kid and trying to get into things, and you hit that stumbling block because you just didn't know and you didn't have anybody to mentor you. I think that's one thing that can kind of get forgotten is, everybody started somewhere.
That's very true.
Yeah, someone's mentioning about possibly volunteering at a railroad museum, right? Michelle's smiling. I know why.
It would be great if more people would volunteer at museums and even your local tourist railroad. And honestly, this is what happens at our museum that gets people into the hobby. A volunteer talks to them, says, "Hi, or why are you here today? Tell me why you like trains." And all it takes sometimes is one conversation and one person to ask you a question. And then they'll lots, like so much comes out of them. They're so excited to share with somebody. And I think that's how people get back into the hobby sometimes. So
Yeah, no, it's that personal touch of someone who's really excited about model railroading or about railroading in general. And the conversations that can really get other people involved, bring them in.
yeah, I think you put that human touch back into it, and it's that human connection of we're talking about trains and this is cool.
Yeah.
That really gets people excited to come to enjoy the hobby. Whether there was a question about being an introvert or an extrovert, regardless if it's about your hobby, you'd like to talk about it, whether you are an introvert or an extrovert. I think that's kind of just a human thing.
Yeah, I saw that comment flash by, but I couldn't find it when I was trying to scroll back up to highlight it. But it's interesting listening to you guys talking about this. I'm also thinking about, you don't know what that kid's home life is. And it could really be, this can be applied really to anybody. If you're volunteering at a museum and anybody approaches you, you don't know what that person's life is like. And if you just treat that person, like they matter, like you care, that can make the biggest difference. And I think that all of us, regardless of where we come from, appreciate being treated that way. I have a story that I'm not going to recount here because it would take too long, but I remember being treated that way by someone, and it still is touching to this day. This happened, 10 some odd years ago. And there's just something to that. And I do think that, especially treating a kid with that kind of, I guess, reverence, I'm not sure if I'm using the right word there, can make a really huge difference. And if they find that level of kindness or kind of level of care, they'll be back, to, and it may even be like, wow, I want to be like this guy and he's into train. So I want to do that too. You know what I mean? It's kind of a stupid example, I think, but probably makes the point that I'm trying to make here.
Well, and I also make the point that it's not always a child that comes into the hobby. There's plenty of adults who have walked in our museum and said, I've never modeled in my life, and now they're modelers. So I think it's any age. Yeah,
your audio went really wacky there for a second. Yeah. What did you say, Michelle? What was the first part of what you said?
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
What I said is there have been many people who have come into our museum at every age and said, I've never modeled, but this is really inspiring to me, and I really want to learn how to do this. And some of our best volunteers were not modelers before they walked in the door. And so I know we're talking about bringing kids into the hobby, but I think it's really anybody, any age.
Sure. Well, I mean, kids are of all ages, right? I mean,
right.
I would say I'm a kid in a way. I think my wife would agree too.
Oh yeah, I mean,
and if we're talking about
age, at any age, it can hit that you just see somebody's work that just really inspires you. That I gotta have this. I gotta do something similar.
If we talk about being an ambassador of the hobby like that, part of the experience that might make somebody want to become a hobbyist is because of the human interaction that they've had. If they ran into somebody that really was enthusiastic and kind, they may take away from the experience less about trains. May not be the important part of that. They may see your enthusiasm. They may see how you're treating people, and they want to be a part of it because of that. And that's part of building the lifelong friendships, is that the trains aren't necessarily the important part for all of us. It's that you have friends that you can share these common interests in, and you enjoy being around them. So trains isn't the whole of this. It's how you're treated.
And we have something in this area that is like you can go house to house to house, and it's normally promoted at train shows and stuff like that. And it was canceled this year because of the showstopper type thing. But you get this whole list, and it's got like 30, 40 layouts on it. You go house to house, and you get to see those layouts and what they've developed. And I've noticed a lot of younger kids going to those things. Their parents might be taking them, yes, but they're more intrigued to look at certain scenes and stuff like that. And if they can recognize it or something like that, they grasp it more that way too. Like, it's a lot more open, I find, and there's a lot more ways to get into this hobby than there is just buying a train set and starting that way. You can take them out into public, into the shows, and into these meet and greets type thing on people's layouts and get to know it that way too. So before you even start, you can see if they have an interest in it. And that goes, like Michelle said, anybody has an interest in it, right? Not just kids. So,
it's kind of a tangent.
I think somebody in the chat made a really great point that you don't have to operate. You don't have to have a train set if you just operate. That can get your interest in the hobby. You don't, if you're not able to build something and fill space with it at your parents' house or whatever, but you can get in with a group and they let you come and run trains. That can build a spark for the hobby. And I know that I've got a few operators that show up here before COVID, kind of next sessions, that they don't have the time, space, or money for a railroad, but they love to operate and they love the camaraderie. That's another great way to get kids involved.
We're big kids. I mean, that's been
right.
The bulk of the model railroading that I've done, frankly, over the past several years, is that I've operated at layouts where I've been able to bring my stuff along, or I've operated at the local round robin operating groups. So yeah, that's a great way to bring people in and keep them engaged as well.
I think that's part of the reason that a lot of the younger members at our club have joined, is they're more into the operations. Maybe they'll transfer over at some point to doing the building kits and whatnot, even though those are kind of becoming more and more rare now. I think as they get older, they'll probably start to dabble in a little bit of that stuff. Maybe they'll have space because their parents move to a bigger house, or they move out when they hit 18, or whenever. So yeah, you don't have to push somebody to be an actual modeler. You can see if they want to do just operations, because I know a lot of kids are just happy with something going in a big circle for a couple of hours, half hour, or whatever, and then maybe they'll be even more interested in it when they get to actually drive it around a big layout and don't just watch it go around and around in the same circle.
Well, I know that when I was little, the layout I had several sidings involved, several crossovers and that sort of thing. And that really added a lot to the hobby too, trying to shuffle the cars into just that particular track, where it could belong and that kind of thing.
I've seen some really cool setups at train shows where they have what looks to me like some form of a time saver, where they let the kids switch cars around. I think that's pretty cool. Definitely handing a throttle to a kid is a hook, So very cool. Someone's asking, we're running out of time here, but someone is asking and why don't we close with this one? Because I want to be respectful of everybody's time here. Someone's asking how much of a difference you think YouTube has made to the hobby. And I'll let you guys go first. I'll answer that at the end when I wrap things up.
I definitely see more kids commenting like, "Hey, I'm 12 years old." Facebook is the same way on the Facebook comments, like, "Hey, I'm 12 years old. I'm just getting into this. I've got a couple bucks saved up from Christmas or birthday. What should I get? I can't afford any of the crazy expensive stuff." So I think it definitely puts it out there quite a bit more with it being on YouTube. Kids tend to love YouTube, I've noticed. My friends' kids are always like watching something on their kids mode iPad and whatnot. I know that they've changed the restriction settings quite a bit lately, so this may change things now depending on how what people put on their channels and whether or not it shows to children. But I think that it's definitely helped quite a bit, expand it to a lot of people.
And
I would
go ahead, Michelle, and I'll go after you.
Okay, I was just gonna say YouTube has helped me tremendously, because I'll be doing something, I'm like, oh wait, I don't know what that is, so I'll pull up a video, and it's about modeling, it's about rail history. Any questions about just the whole railroad in general? I've answered a lot of historic questions by watching YouTube videos, because they're kind of short and sweet and to the point, and I didn't have to read a book this thick to get the answer.
Right.
So very useful for me.
Well, I know for me, YouTube was great at helping me get back into the hobby. Of course, someone in the comments mentioned James Wright and all the videos that he does for reviewing and helping let us know letting us know, what's out there. But not to brown nose or anything, John, but I know that TSG Multimedia, has had some wonderful long-term project videos. Like I remember that you and Dan walked through remodeling or modifying some GP35s for Southern Pacific, for Santa Fe, with the different detailing, showing the techniques involved in all of those, series that took several months often to complete. And so that was really helpful for me to try and get back into it and get my bearings about what all's available, what all I can do. So I think it's definitely had a huge influence, all the stuff that's available on YouTube.
Yeah. And I can remember your comments from several years ago. We've actually known of each other for a long time from YouTube, right?
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Dave? I heard you were starting to talk.
Well, I was just going to bring up the fact, like, YouTube has opened up this hobby a lot more. It's not a closet hobby anymore, like as I mentioned earlier. If you have a question, all you have to do is type it into YouTube, and there's usually 3 or 4 channels that have done the projects that you're looking at. James also brings up that James Wright does the reviews and stuff like that, and John, not to brown nose or anything, like I've heard, but you also do reviews and stuff of Atlas products and things like that. And I find with the price of the hobby nowadays, and it is as expensive as you make it, but to go out there and buy some of this stuff, it is nice to go on these channels and see reviews of things firsthand, see what they look like, they act like, they sound like, and get an unbiased review from some people before you actually go out and buy it. That, to me, makes the hobby so much more enjoyable. You're not going out just buying something that, oh, they've just released this, I have to go get it. And then you find out that it's the worst piece of rolling stock or something that you've ever bought, right? So there is that. And when it comes down to doing your scenery and stuff like that, how many people know how to do waterfalls, things like that, how to make a tree when you're just getting started? And you can open that up on YouTube, and it's right there. And you can go so many different ways on how to do things, get a way that you know how to do it and can get good at it. So, and then you can post your own videos and help other people, I think. So I just think YouTube's really opened up this hobby so much more. Like I said, you're not in the closet anymore. You're not alone. So
yeah. I think you make a good point about the product spotlights, that it gives people an idea of really what they're going to get out of the box. I hadn't really thought about that before, but in a way it's kind of a public service if you want to look at it that way. I haven't really thought of it that way. So, but thanks for that. Not to brown nose or anything. Thank you.
that one.
Yeah,
for sure it is. Like to get the reviews and stuff like that. Like I said, the hobby is pretty expensive if you want it to be, and it's nice to see those kind of things firsthand. So before you go out and spend your money, it's nice to see what you're going to go out and get. A lot of hobby shops nowadays, brick and mortar, you can't get to them. I'm okay. I've got like 3 or 4 of them around my area, but how many people have to travel 2-3 hours to get to a train store? So you have to order online. So if you can see a review on YouTube before you order it, it's almost like being at the store, I would say. So
I guess if the video's done well.
Well, you don't have problems with that. So
well, did you get to chime in on this one, James? Top right, James?
I did a little bit in the beginning, but I didn't think about it from the adult side. Like, your videos are what I credit getting back into the hobby for.
Not to brown nose or anything?
Because of those. Specifically model railroading, like 101, watching through that whole series. I think I've watched every single one since they came out, and it just kind of was what got me back into the hobby, seeing all the layout tours, specifically Silicon Valley lines. That's why I decided to join them. Saw them, got a preview, could go find out and do some research on their website. And then there's, various other people who are doing stuff like the long-term layout build series that I think Stephen Bennett does. I follow his, I can't remember his name. I think it's Stephen Bennett. But watching those, it gives me ideas. If I want to see something and I'm like stumped on what I should do for a section of my layout, I just go watch a YouTube video, go plug something in, and just see like, oh, hey, look, there's this little detail in the background that, I would have never really noticed in Model Railroader because they didn't do the overall shot of everything. The documentation that these various people are doing of their home layout builds is really helpful.
Right. Okay. Well, we've gone a little bit over the time, so sorry about that, guys. We're about 5 minutes over. I think I'll finish just by saying that YouTube, it's more than just YouTube for me. I think that we need to think about the electronic world as social media in general. And you have YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the list goes on. You have a lot of places that people share, whether it's prototype railfan pictures or modeling ideas or whatever. And I think that the hobby has, or I should say, social media has changed the hobby. And I think that this discussion is a great example of that. We have 6 people from, let's see, 5 different time zones. I'm sorry. Yeah, five different time zones. No, 3 different time zones. My math sucks. 3 different time zones in 2 different countries. And I know that some of the people that are talking in our chat are from yet another country. The channel that I run has viewers from everywhere around the world. So as long as you have a computer, I think it's really opened it up. And I think it's a good thing. And I think that if you are open to some change like that, you can also benefit from other people's experiences and other people's opinions, or their willingness to share what they've learned. I know that you can, if you pay attention, you can learn a lot from other people's mistakes. And that's I think a lesson in life that's worth learning for people of any age. So with that, I guess if anybody has anything else you want to say, this would be a great time to say it. Otherwise, I'm going to end the stream.
Well, you did mention mistakes, John, and that's one thing. We've got 71 people watching right now, and that's one thing. If you do post videos, post some of your mistakes too. If you made that mistake, somebody else is going to make that mistake. So if you share it on YouTube, it will help other people. So don't just share the good stuff. This is the best I can do. This is my end product. Share your mistakes too and help us all out. Michelle needs the help.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Anybody else before I wrap it? Because we're going. Okay. Nobody's unmuting. Thank you all very much for your time and your expression. I really do appreciate it. And I hope that what we've done here will give the people who end up seeing it, in addition to the live people, but the people who watch it later, something to learn from, or maybe something to be inspired by. And I thank you all and appreciate you all. And yeah, we'll be doing another panel discussion next month. It's on, I wrote it down, December 27th, and we're going to be talking about modular railroading. So you want to tune in for that. I'm really excited about that one. And thank everybody for watching all the super chats and stickers and stuff that came in. I saw a few run by there. And what I'm going to do now is make our guests disappear one by one. Hopefully I won't be kicking them off the stream entirely. Yeah, everybody wave now. Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it. Thanks, James. Appreciate you being here. Thanks, Michelle. Appreciate you being here. James, other James, thank you very much. Oh, thanks, Dave. I'll talk to you sometime soon. All right.
It's been fun.
All right. And I'm going to let this, I'm going to let this run for about the next 20 or 30 seconds, and then the stream will end. So if anybody's watching the chat over here, it's your chance to say goodbye to your friends. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.